4, 3, 2, 1. All right, and welcome to the OccultCast with Thomas Sheridan. Today is a special guest. Really happy. I know you guys have been requesting him, and we've heard the emails and all the requests and messages. Thank you for all of that. And we'll have John returning next week. Hope you guys like the special edition of the Spear Being Alliance report we did, which was pretty funny. I think, if you don't have a sense of humor about these things, then you might as well just go away. You know what I mean? So with us, we have amazing Thomas Sheridan. If you don't know him by now, I mean, come on. Let's get with it. You can find him at thomassheridanarts.com. He's an artist, a filmmaker. Check out his Occult Dublin, which is one of my favorites, because I'm a James Joyce fan and just love the whole architecture of that. He talks about so many things. It's ridiculous. But corporate psychopathy, and all kinds of really interesting topics. He's become one of the most in demand speakers and guests out there in this so-called alternative media movement, if you want to call it that, or whatever it is. But hey, Thomas, I don't want to waste any more time. Thanks for coming on, man.
Oh, pleasure to be here, Brandon. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So yeah, man. I just thought. Where should we start the discussion? I'm thinking, when I was watching your videos, and I've been a fan for as long as I can remember. Really getting into, I didn't really wake up. I don't know what waking up would be, but coming onto your work, I think it's been about 3 years. Which it might not be a long time, but. I've pretty much consumed I think every talk you've given that's out there, and books and stuff. So there's just so much when you approach someone like you, I just have to narrow it down a little bit, and I want to ask the questions that maybe not everybody asks. So I noticed that you're an artist as well, and you painted a really great Cthulhu at the pub or something like that. When did you get that? Was great, and I thought that was great, and I think the H.P. Lovecraft fans love that, and they're a group of artists too. When did you become a fan of H.P. Lovecraft, and how did that come about?
When I was about 14, we used to get these comic books from America, published by a company called Warren. I was a big comic fan, and I wasn't huge into like the Marvel and DC imports, but there was these 3 comics that came from the US, Creepy, Eerie, and Vampirilla. And they were just outstanding, I thought at the time. The artwork was amazing, off the scale. The stories were very dark, but they often had a very tongue-in-cheek kind of darkness about them, right, which I really liked. And I used to devour these comics. They're quite collectible now and quite valuable, especially in this part of the world. And it was about the only American comics that were imported that I really got like mad for. So anyway, the letter page is always fascinating me because, especially back then in Ireland in the late 70s, we were very isolated from America. America might have well been on another planet, and it seems so spectacular and gigantic compared to where I grew up. But now I realize everything is kind of relative in a different kind of, like in a kind of a, should we say, a psychic level. But anyway, looking back on it now. But anyway, there was a letter in one of the issues of one of the magazines, and someone had said, will you do, comic book interpretations of H.P. Lovecraft stories? And the reply was, well, we're all gigantic Lovecraft fans here, but there are copyright issues and so on. But many of the stories in the comics are homages, or, they are kind of inspired by Lovecraftian ideas. Well, I didn't know who this guy was. Who's this guy? So somehow, a few years later or something, I got my hands on an audio cassette of David McCallum, who was reading The Rats in the Wall.
Oh, cool.
He was the actor who was in the Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Okay.
And that was the first thing I think I ever came into contact before I even had a book. And I just loved the whole kind of style of it. So then I started getting the books and reading them, and it was it was a life-changing thing for me in many ways, because I immediately thought that he was documenting real events. I know that sounds mad.
No, it doesn't. Yeah.
The way they were written, particularly the way he, that's almost like it was almost a journalistic style. That it's and every the details were so precise.
Right.
That it seemed to me that, like, is this guy reporting fiction or fact? And I still don't know, to be honest with you. I still don't know on some levels, particularly when it came to things like the Necronomicon,
right,
and things like that. And an amazing thing happened to me one night, and this is no joke, I swear to God.
Yeah.
I had like the Penguin or the Corgi book of H.P. Lovecraft, whatever company produced, the collection of short stories.
Yeah.
And I also had the Colin Wilson book on the Necronomicon.
Oh,
I still
fantastic.
have the original copy right in front of me now. It's in bits. The original one from 76 or whenever it was.
Wow.
In front of me. And I at that point, I still believe the Necronomicon was real, even though, because the way this book was, there was no internet back then.
Right.
So you had to kind of like, you just didn't have to find a way to find out, unless you lived in America and you get the Providence or something like that. I just didn't know. So I had the Book of Dead Names, and the way the cover was laid out, the lost masterpiece of occult literature. And this is around the time I was looking for David Edwards and other people's books on magic. And I just assumed it was real, and especially the way Colin Wilson wrote the introduction and all the rituals and everything involved inside it, and so on. So I'm sitting there, I'm lying in bed, right, and I have this. There used to be three broad. I don't know if you had them in America, but we had AM, FM, and LW, which was long wave.
Okay, yeah.
Long wave is what we used to listen to European stations on.
Oh, cool.
And there was a pop music channel called Radio Luxembourg. And
okay.
At the time, and it was like a rock music channel or something I was listening to. Little transistor radio with the little earpiece going,
right. Yeah.
And I'm not kidding you. I used to love moving around the AM dial, right? Moving around and you hear all the static and the noises. People today will never know that.
Oh, I know it. Like. That's sad, yeah.
Amazing, isn't it? And then I heard for a split second Rhode Island's largest Buick dealer, and a bit of a jingle.
No way.
And then it was over. I didn't know what a Buick was. I had no idea what a Buick was. It could have been a food for all I knew, right?
Right.
So it does happen that sometimes radio signals, depending on
that's hilarious.
Atmospheric conditions, can be carried across the Atlantic.
Sure.
And I picked it up for a second, and it was gone. But of all the places in the world for that radio signal to come from, and all the radio stations in America on the East Coast, from New York to where you are, that one came through for a split second.
Wow,
and
that's
so
funny.
That always stuck in my magical consciousness.
Right.
This kind of idea, what did that mean? But and then when I got to America and I was living in New York and playing in bands, we were all the singer especially was a huge Lovecraft band, much bigger than me, and he was just always in the consciousness and in the background there.
Right.
In a way, but I noticed, and another thing too, I find his books, as weird as this sound, kind of comforting. I don't know why. I think because it deals with subconscious themes of this kind of like undercurrent of the psyche coming up and destroying everything, and that's how really I got into it, and why it stayed with me. It's a strange kind of way of getting into it, but that's how it happened.
Wow, that's amazing. That's a really great. That's amazing. So because I noticed that you'd mentioned Lovecraft here and there. You painted a Cthulhu going to the bar, and I was like, oh man, I'm a huge Lovecraft fan. I mean, the way he came to me was like, I look at him as like Alan Moore does, which is he's the guy who wrote The Watchmen and V for Vendetta and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and so on. But he takes Lovecraft to be sort of like some mixture between prophet and but he would recoil from that identification in a way, I think, personally. Lovecraft would. He was so I say this as Necronomicon is actually going on right now in Providence, and believe it or not, there's a whole week dedicated to H.P. Lovecraft and his books and the artists and all that come out in the booksellers that are keeping the Cthulhu mythos alive and all that. But you know, he's inspired and his influence is so huge. I don't think people understand anymore like how powerfully influential he was on Star Trek, Doctor Who, or any of the things that would follow him, even the literature, Stephen King. I mean, these massive giants in the field owe a big debt to this guy from Providence that was just, pretty much, just kind of stuck to writing. There's still letters being discovered, and he's written over 100,000 letters that have been cataloged. And we don't still. You're right. We don't get it. We don't need like some of the generation. You're right. They don't know what it's like to find those weird, radio stations or signals that get through. Right. And everything right now is just like, immediately gratification. And it's kind of lost a bit of its magic. For me, television was magic, like how am I seeing this here? I understood it was, it was a technology, but wasn't it Arthur Clarke that said, any advanced magic is inseparable from from magic, right? Or technology. So magic and technology very tied in. But with H.P. Lovecraft, so one of my favorite stories, and I think you did a reading of it, which is awesome because all his books and everything he's done, all his writings are public domain, and like finally, there's no copyright infringement on anything. Just to be clear, because I'm going to be doing a bunch of... I took a class, and H.P. Lovecraft was introduced in the best way possible through these amazing audio recordings. And so I stumbled on one that was called The Shadow over Innsmouth. And that, if you live in New England like I do, and you grew up here, there is a sort of like mystical, ancient, curse or something that's been put over the land, and like... You feel that it's not like anywhere else in the world. And so people, like Edgar Allan Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and H.P. Lovecraft, Stephen King, that grow out of New England and write about this like New England Gothic horror. It definitely connects to a lot of people. And the idea of a non-humanoid alien was pretty radical too, because even today... we have these blue avians around, and they're humanoid figures that just look kind of like chickens, and but they're still humanoid. Like Lovecraft was saying, no. What if, what if it was on a cosmic scale that, like, if it blinks or sneezes, humanity is gone, or not even that. Imagine if it's just permeating your dreams, So, and then he inspires a whole magical tradition with Kenneth Grant and the Typhonian trilogy that he did, which is really amazing. He's trying to, combine Crowley with H.P. Lovecraft and the ancient Sumerian text, and that would eventually come out as the Avon Press Necronomicon with the author of Simon, that a lot of people are really influenced by, so... I really loved your Shadow over Innsmouth because, H.P. Lovecraft, and I can understand why you would think it would, and I did too, thought the Necronomicon was maybe a real book, right? Because there are books, number one, claiming to be that book, and he puts it right alongside, like, Le Grand Grimoire and real grimoires that are out there, and real esoteric books that are out, like the Enochian Keys of John Dee, he'll go on about, and so on. I just find him almost like prophetic now. And you're right, he's so precise about what he's saying. What's interesting is that when he mentions a date, like the very date that the beast is in the cave or something like that, it turns out that Aleister Crowley was in, the chamber, the great, the Great Pyramid, or one of the pyramids, I think, channeling the Book of the Law, so calling himself the beast in the cave. So he's just amazing on several levels. So anyway, that's just one thing I really... Anything to add to that, Thomas?
Well, I think you put that beautifully. The Shadow over Innsmouth, I think, is one of the greatest short stories ever written. I think the thing that always stuck with me again is because he's such a visual writer that he actually paints pictures in your consciousness. I always remember, so I think that's one of the reasons there hasn't been many Lovecraftian movies or interpretations of his books put to film, because they're so imaginative on the kind of the narrative level that they explode into your consciousness. I think that's why they probably lended themselves better to things like animations or video games. But what I always remember about the story, you know, the whole thing of like, it's a young guy coming of age and he's going to Arkham, and then he discovers that the bus is too expensive, so he gets this, you know, all of the fated thing. He gets on this cheaper bus that stops by this rundown fishing village or gold and refining mill town called Innsmouth, where he has to change buses to go to Arkham, and he decides to stay off because of like the strange the old architecture, and also an unusual piece of jewelry he sees in the museum. But the thing is that he can't get into the town by train because the station office master says to him, "Oh, the railroad, the B&M, it stopped going there years ago." But actually, when he gets out of, I don't want to spoil the story for anyone, but when he actually escapes from the town, he escapes via the old abandoned railroad line. And so it was almost like Lovecraft's way of saying, like, you know, and this is something that always fascinates me in my work, is that the modernity, you're only one failure, infrastructural failure, or, you know, sort of like modernization or civilization failure, away from the darkness that will consume you. And I just said that at the same time he was doing all this, remember, you know, between Cthulhu and also the fishy creatures from the Marsh Refiner that came to the Marsh Refiner, or interbred the Marsh family, in the shadow of our Innsmouth, they were from the sea, right? From the ocean, from the depths of the ocean. This is around the same time that Carl Jung was developing his own, you know, his theory of the subconscious mind and its relationship to the depths of the ocean. I'll tell you one thing I did, nearly did for a laugh. There's a 5,000-year-old Neolithic court cairn here called Creevy Keel, and I was showing some people around, some tourists around it one day, and I stood on top of it. Now you can see the Atlantic top of the kind of dolmen at the entrance, and I was standing on top of that, and I was looking out across towards the ocean, the Atlantic, and between me and there was a castle, a Gothic castle called Classy Bond. Now, even though it was on the opposite side of the Atlantic, I burst out laughing because I could not imagine a more Lovecraftian setting. And I was this close to doing the invocation of the Elder Ones. Except I didn't want to look like a loony next to the people. But yeah, that's how much it affects you. It's so real. It is real. And yeah, Alan Moore is right. He was a prophet. He absolutely was. Now, back to his whole thing of shunning the magical aspects of his work. Well, I think that was a fear. I think that he actually knew he was an instinctual musician, if not, as some of the theories out there, that his grandfather, who was a big-time Freemason, had a major collection of magical books and so on read from a child. I think that's highly plausible. But I also think, like, his dreams regarding the night gaunts and stuff, that I think they were actually conjurations. And that he claimed they were dreams, but I think they were actually conjurations. He was messing around with Granddad's grimoires. It's sort of like the stigmata who hides their bleeding hands. They don't want anyone. They themselves don't want to accept that they're a stigmata. And I think that was actually a motivating factor in his almost like self-loathing of his own magical identity.
Wow, that's a really great way to put it. Yeah, and you see him, because any piece of writing is ultimately a reflection of the mind, and especially when you're dealing with imaginary fiction, and especially dealing with what he did. You know, it's amazing. One would think that this would come from an atheist scientist on one hand, but you're right. Like, he had that influence. And he knew that the roots of science actually went back to magic, essentially, I think. And I mean, we don't have actual proof of this, but we do know that his grandfather was in the Egyptian rite of Memphis Misery and things like this, and that he was one of the biggest industrialists that built up Providence and all the factories and stuff. So, yeah. I mean, he definitely was might have been, you know, tampering around with the grimoires, Grandpa's grimoires, and then who knows? I mean, I've had experiences with Ouija boards just from that. So, you know, who knows? But you're right. Like, you know, there is a practical, like, you know, when we're talking, people take this seriously. Like, there's kind of like a YouTuber. I hate that word, but a guy on YouTube, but he's a magician too. His name is E.A. Coetting, and he goes and he does like he has a friend, I forget his name, but he does Lovecraftian, you know, actual calls to Cthulhu, and I believe that it's also in is it Anton LaVey's? I think it is his daughter's book on the Satanic Witch, or some, maybe it's the revised edition of the Satanic Bible, but there's actually you know, magical how to, you know, call the Cthulhu in there, like a ritual practice. And Kenneth Grant, who was, you know, thought himself as the inheritor of Aleister Crowley in the OTO. He wrote about this in very mystical like ways almost, you know. It's very hard to read and put together, but and so yeah, it just it's the way people even today take it very seriously. And you know, and I think that the anti-gods have, you know, the pantheon of his anti-gods have more of a depth to them than the God idea of Christianity or any of the, you know, most of the faiths out there. I don't want to disparage all faiths, but some of this anti-God concept is really it's pretty heavy, you know. It gets into your dreams, it's part of you, and then it's like, is he talking about what's going on right now? Was he really a prophet? So yeah, you know, so let me if we're done with that topic, let me move on to what I had prepared here. So okay, so oh, this is another literary. I'm gonna stay with the literary. Well, all right. Jeez, there's so many places to go with it. So I just want to go really quickly. J.R.R. Tolkien as well. Any magical, alchemical imagery there that, or any influence at all for you?
Well, Tolkien is an interesting one. He was a devout Catholic, but he was like a throwback to sort of like the Catholic sort of philosophies of the Middle Ages,
right?
Which is when Catholicism, and this was before the Reformation, was probably, you know, well, because basically European Catholicism is paganism, just with like just with some, you know, with some ideas changed, but basically Christianity would have never survived in Europe if it hadn't adopted paganism. Everything in Catholicism is paganism. I think that could bring us back to Lovecraft as well, being a New England Presbyterian. You know, that it was always maybe half the reason for his refusal of his magical state would have made it become something like that. It's you know, this puritanical idea. But yeah, Tolkien's Catholicism was very mystical. I read a bio on him not too long ago, and there was kind of a mini reformation going on between him and Lewis. They were both friends at both Oxford Dons, but he said that C.S. Lewis could transform into quite an anti-Catholic bigot.
Right.
And when his brother came and visited him from Ireland, they would just sit around joking and making sort of like sectarian comments about Catholics, which Tolkien would not defend. And later on, Lewis admitted to him that the reason why he never defended these kinds of anti-Catholic slurs is because ultimately he was more mystically inclined individual.
Right.
So I definitely think there's something to that. Now, Tolkien, you know, I wouldn't say that. I never got that impression from him. The man was absolutely genius. There's no doubt about that. He was really special. I just think that he was attempting what Lovecraft has achieved, right? Now, Tolkien was attempting to write an Anglo-Saxon, modern, Western-speaking mythology
Yes.
that would compensate for cultures where such mythologies had been lost.
Absolutely.
So in the English tradition, well, a lot of that was lost because of the things like the harrying of the North, where basically the English were exterminated by the Normans. And there was also leftovers of Anglo-Saxon, and enough had survived through the Eddas and stuff. So he was trying to reinvent or reimagine a Western mythology in a modern sense, as I suppose people like Stan Lee were doing the same thing at Marvel Comics and so on. However, which the one that's most likely to become a Western mythology would probably be Lovecraft. You understand? I think in years to come, his work will be seen in the same way I'm talking about, like, say, hundreds of years from now. His work will probably be seen in the same way that we see the Norse Eddas now.
Oh,
As
interesting.
repositories of wisdom, stories that took on a life of their own and sort of became relevant, increasingly relevant as culture and society progressed. And I think in 500 years from now, they'll be talking about the American mythology will probably be Lovecraftian. Wow. So I think that's the irony of that. I think what Tolkien was trying to achieve, Lovecraft did by default.
Wow, man, very good. Yeah, I mean, yeah, for Tolkien, I mean, we have drafts and drafts of Lord of the Rings, and The Hobbit. There's like, there's so many, and all his notes at the Bodleian Library and Oxford and so on and so forth. I mean, I don't think that exists for any other living author that I know of, where every single little bit of his writings and notes have been, even his Christmas letters that he gave his children, have been scoured over and debated and every single thing, So, but
he was an excellent artist too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he was. And he, he was an interesting person, and for sure. But he was definitely different than Lovecraft in that it wasn't. He was more refined. Like, he would refine his writing, and the characters were actually, would make decisions for him in some ways. They would drive the narrative and things like that. Whereas I see what you're saying, where Lovecraft, a lot of his writings are just like, they just come right to him, and they're one page, of printed, handwritten, bang, you have a story right here. With Tolkien, you have drafts upon drafts upon drafts of stuff. So that's a really good point to make. Excellent.
But Tolkien did dip into very interesting folklores and stuff. For instance, in Ireland, Gollum Gollum is basically an Irish demon. He was a visiting professor at the University of Galway, and he lived in that. He was spent time in Galway and visiting a place called the Burren, which is basically a desert.
Right.
In the southwest of Ireland. It's basically a remarkable landscape that's like something you would see at the back of Australia, like the outback. And it has its own particular species of plants that grow low on the ground, and just like it has a mixture of tropical and alpine plants that have artificially made themselves into kind of like bonsai to avoid the winds. And it's the only place in Ireland where there's like a proliferation of reptiles. You have slow worms, which looks like a snake, and you have lizards all over the place. But there's a cave there.
Whoa.
And in the cave, according to local legend, there was a demon called the Gollum.
No
kidding.
And
that's where, and that's where he got it from.
Wow. Wow. Now, so, I mean, okay, so, I've had professors, one of my professors, Dr. Demetria Femi, she writes about Celtic identity and Celtic fairy stories and things like this, and Tolkien. She's one of the preeminent Tolkien scholars out there and stuff like that. But very cool, and but she knows all about these interesting local folklore that actually tie right into what Tolkien was saying. I think to Tolkien, Ireland wasn't just that just Ireland, the island, but it also encompassed more of a general landmass, right? So, and there was that land bridge, I think, between, is it Ireland or the UK and is it Scandinavia or some lost land bridges have been found that would he was trying to connect it via the languages too, and that's pretty.
Yeah, that's the important point. He was more of a linguistic sort of storyteller than an actual historical or folklore. And one of the reasons the Irish thing didn't really mesh into his worldview was because he wasn't particularly interested in Gaelic. He was mostly interested in Welsh and Anglo-Saxon and Scandinavian.
Right.
So he's moving towards a sort of a Germanic kind of linguistic tradition away. So that had a lot to do with it. I think he even read something that he said once where he said that he never really found Irish particularly interesting. He found Welsh much more interesting, and that's pretty where a lot of that came from. A lot of that, I think he was more like a linguistic tapestry maker of stories than an actual geographical or a folklore one.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, for Tolkien, language is primary, which is kind of mystical when you think about it too. And almost like a Kabbalistic idea. And my thing is comparing Tolkien and James Joyce, because on a I call it the phonoaesthetic level, where the words and so there's nothing that exists in the world called the Helcaraxa, which is in Tolkien. It's a made-up word. Same thing, Lovecraft has made-up words too, but they like Miskatonic University. Sounds like a real university, right? Like, if no one would tell the difference, but it doesn't. It's just, but how does that, but if I said Mzikabaklit University, it wouldn't make any sense. So the authentic phonoaesthetic sense that exists both in Tolkien and H.P. Lovecraft and definitely James Joyce, who is on much different levels, I think, is something to be explored, but not too many people are looking at that. So, looking forward to look at that. But, yeah, that was amazing. And so, what I also find fascinating, Thomas, is that you talk about corporate psychopathy, and that's how you started. You were working. You said in New York, and you kind of just noticed that all these people around you were surrounded by Wall Street sort of psychopaths. That right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was all of them. I'd say it was actually very rare to meet what I would call the genuine object. But what happened was you were living in a kind of an aquarium of this kind of psychopathic culture. And this is what the issue was. I was I studied graphic design and communications and went to work in a couple of companies there, putting together documents. My job was basically taking what money men said and translating it into a readable or understandable format, both visually and linguistically. So I was like basically a translator from corporate bullshit to everyday language.
Right. Wow.
And I was good at it. So they liked me there because I was good at that kind of thing. And and so there was. The majority of people who worked in these places are fine. They're all decent human beings, just like anyone else. They're just trying to pay their bills. But certain episodes happened that I thought were, they were beyond just saying, "Oh, it's just the business world," or "That's just how business works." There was an almost a delicious sense of viciousness to them that the individuals doing it were involved in. At the same time, I was very, very interested in serial killers. So I was reading all kinds of criminal profiling and criminal psychology books, and I was also interested in serial killers and cults. And suddenly it was dawning on me that many of the sort of common traits that were specific to serial killers or psychopathic serial killers were completely evident in the corporate world. The corporate world is essentially a serial killer that uses commerce rather than a chainsaw or a gun. And then I started to notice that certain individuals that I worked with had behaviors that were very, very similar to what was described within these books. They talk about how many serial killers could be superficially glib and very flattering. They could change in an instant. They would be in a moment of power over somebody, that rather than being in a state of upset or what's the word I should use? High tension in a state in a negative way, they'd often be charged by it. It would make them feel great.
Oh, yeah.
And I started to see this, and then there was almost nothing around then on sort of like everyday psychopathy.
Right.
And you get the odd thing. You might get the odd thing in a science, like this New Scientist or a magazine like that. And then you see the odd thing listed. I was a member of the New York Public Library, and that was amazing. That was like, I mean, so there was some things that I found there.
Yeah.
That's I found with Harvey Cleckley's book, The Mask of Sanity. But what really did it for me was when Robert Hare's book, Without Conscience, came out in the late 90s, and that was the one that made me glue it all together. Yes, there was, there are people who walk amongst us who do not have compassion and are literally they're predators, and they will do whatever it takes to get on top. And unfortunately, wherever there's easy money to be made, media, big business, advertising, anything like that, it's chock-a-block with them.
Yeah. And have you ever read the book or seen the movie American Psycho?
I've never read the book. I've seen the film. It's a very realistic portrayal, except for the violence. The violence that they put in there was probably just to tell the story good. But that guy, the actor Christian Bale, played the part perfectly.
Yeah.
In fact, it would have been better at the end if none of those murders had happened and he just imagined them in his head.
Yeah.
Because that would have been it would have been an extremely realistic. In fact, there's one scene in that where he has a girl over to his apartment and he puts the nail gun to the back of her head and then takes it away.
Oh, right.
If they had handled the violence as all that, not
That's a good point.
Or just fantasized, it would have been a very realistic, perfectly realistic. But yeah, that film was bang on in many ways.
Yeah.
But a better one is To Die For with Nicole Kidman. That's a better portrayal of psychopath.
That's another one. That's the female psychopath, correct? Like she seduces.
But they're all the same. They'll just they'll use whatever they have. And if they're good looking like she was in that film, they'll use their sexuality to play on people's insecurities. And Wow.
So all right. So when I say American Psycho, for me, like at the end where they're all sitting around, he's kind of nervous that the cop's onto him, Willem Dafoe, and he's going to be found out, and then he just realizes that nope, it's all good. This is fine. This is how your life is going to be, but in the book, I found that fascinating, and so I read the book too, the Bret Easton Ellis book, and he talks about there were whole chapters on like Phil Collins albums and things like this, where
that was very realistic. In the film, that's actually, if you want, I mean, nobody should really go around psychopath spotting because it's just one of these things that can kind of degenerate us, but. That scene with the Phil Collins where he's describing the album as a review he read in Rolling Stone, rather than some of the genuine love for music, and that's a very, very classic psychopath.
Okay, because I see it as more because I was gonna do a thing for Vice magazine back in the day when they were only in Montreal and in just a magazine and weren't this huge thing that they are now. I was going to do a story called American Hipster, kind of in the vein of American Psychopath, but this hipster character wanted to do, instead of, he would covet the latest Puma sneakers or something like that, or the latest, vinyl from Japan, or and all this like really hipster bullshit stuff. So, just like the way they have, they take these mediocre. I mean, I like Phil Collins; he's great. Don't get me wrong, but the way that they see sort of they have a hobby, and but it's interesting that he took that from the Rolling Stone review that he had read, and it wasn't his own thoughts. So that's completely different.
No, but he had no feeling for the music. That's why. And the one at the Huey Lewis in the News is even funnier.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It's like and when the 1984 album Sports came out, well, that's when they really came into their own. That's like anyone who's a fan of music or films or doesn't talk like that, but they do.
Yeah.
Because it's all glibness, it's all superficiality. They're trying to pretend to be a human being.
Wow, that's. I mean, I know I've encountered some, but it's just, I mean, it's scary, a little bit. I can see why people get scared because they exist on every level. Do you think it's an outgrowth of the psychopathic corporate personhood, just the culture itself, or just a rare genetic thing, or?
Well, well, there's real psychopaths, right? And they're very rare. Across total society, there's about 1%. You can identify them by putting them under an fMRI scanner and applying various stimuli to see what they're like. But that's the genuine article.
Right.
Now, so like these are people who there's absolutely no proof it's genetic. Mm-hmm. There's no proof it's a brain damage or anything like that. There's none of that stuff. There's none of that kind of thing. It's a complete mystery. I think, looking at it from a kind of an esoteric way of thinking, maybe a bit woo, is that consciousness exists exterior to the human physiology and probably always has, and it's a different kind of consciousness that gets in there. But that's just my opinion, based on the fact that nothing else has come along to convince me it's any kind of genetic or biological. Now I'm talking about hard evidence. I'm not talking about some. When you see these research programs, they always begin with maybe or should be or could suggest. That's not the same thing as is or a fact. Right. So you get a lot of this kind of nonsense. There was like all kinds of things like that. But the unfortunately, yes, it has permeated into Western society, particularly since the 1980s. For some reason, it happened like it's somehow. There was a film with Michael Caine from the 1980s called The Shock to the System, and it's about two English guys working on Wall Street and the new generation coming along. I think a lot of it was. I think I see everything in mystical kind of ways. I think with the arrival of the kind of the neoliberal economic model, as promoted and put into effect by the likes of Reagan and Margaret Thatcher on both sides of the Atlantic, that somehow a kind of a seed in consciousness is planted at the bigger level, and in the collective unconscious, this kind of, pathological babies are born, or they're molded into this consciousness that actually is right for that time, just like you would get, during a certain political system or you would get the same kind of thing. Right. Now, I think that's, so I think, like, for some reason, it took off for some reason in the West in the 1980s. I definitely think it was connected somehow to neoliberal economics.
Interesting.
This kind of coldness. And it put the psychopathic individuals who could actually function in the corporate sphere into the fore.
Wow.
And it made everyone around them proto-psychopaths, having to emulate this pathology in order to survive. So that's my opinion on it. I think it arises in the collective unconscious. I think it's beyond the physical realm. Yeah. And are they demons or something? Maybe they could be. I think that's as much a good of an analogy as anything.
Yeah.
But until I see hard science proving it's actually 100% physical, or at least giving me a very, very good approximation of that, I think it's still all to play for and where they come from.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you did a great talk on Are Psychopaths Demons, and I encourage everybody to check that out, because that's a legitimate question. It's a fascinating question. That's really interesting that the liberal economics of the 80s with Thatcher and Reagan is kind of what seeded the plants of these psychopaths. So wow. Fascinating.
That's not unique in history either. You have you could have the kind of the post-Nietzschean German society where you have like this kind of like a movement towards sort of like a weaponized version of German and Teutonic nationalism. It spawns itself in things like these Wandervogel groups, these groups of young Germans wandering in the forests and wandering across the German landscape, and they eventually became the SS.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, seeds of consciousness are planted all the time. The thing is to watch out and see where it comes from. I mean, I think it'll be a long time before people actually recognize the damage that neoliberal economics did back in the 1980s, because since then the media has been inventing new monsters for us to hate.
Absolutely.
Such as the neocons and now Trump. But I think, like, in my lifetime, the pivotal sort of pathological event was the neoliberal economic model, because it basically it destroyed the West in many ways.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, and there's this huge propaganda push to make Reagan and Thatcher look like heroic in some way now. You know, like you have. I mean, I was stumbling through the TV once and recently, and there was like 2 Margaret Thatcher movies or something like this. And and like and people saying, well, Reagan is the most detested president in history, one of them anyway. In some polls, but who can trust polls these days anyway? But hey, let's plug anything you want to plug. We should probably wind down because I know it's late over there in Ireland. You've been really generous with the time. We'd have to have you on again, Thomas. We've just scratched the top.
Definitely. I'm sorry, I've got work in the morning.
I know, it's fine.
I'd love to come back. I've really enjoyed this, Brandon. So thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to be speaking in Houston I think it's 16th and 17th of September.
Oh,
Houston,
that's right.
Texas.
Yeah.
And so if anyone is down, any of your listeners are down that way,
yep.
Come down. It's a new paradigm conference.
Yeah.
And I'll be talking about 2 subjects. One, the one lecture will be about the bizarre similarities between the so-called alien abduction experience and Irish fairy folk experiences.
Oh, fascinating.
And doing comparative things with that. And the other one will be a lecture on Nazi occultism and mysticism.
Oh, man. Wow.
Or Germanic folk magic.
Oh, man.
And maybe that'd be nice. It's my first speaking date in America.
Oh, so, congratulations!
That's been a long time coming. So.
Yeah, welcome, man. I wish I could get down there, but I do know that that would be great. I know some of the listeners are definitely in the area. I think some of the listeners are actually speaking in that conference. So best of luck. That sounds fantastic. You have to come on and give us how it went and what I can see the sort of what I'm thinking of with UFO abductions and the elvish otherworld and the perilous realm and all that.
Oh, there's some incredible stories like that. You see, you have to remember that these alien abductions and aliens in general and all these things, they're just the continuum of something that goes back through human history that was fairies and demons and everything else. It's just that's the current vernacular for it.
Mm-hmm. Very good. All right, well, Thomas, I'll leave your link to your Thomas Sheridan Arts in the description and the social media stuff. And hey, man, thanks so much for coming on and thanks for being generous with your time.
Yeah, it's lovely. I will do it again. Thank you very much, Brad.
All right, man. Thanks. Have a good night. All right. I'm going to stop recording.